Let me just set the scene here first, because I think it's been for the viewers. I think. Okay, so first of all, we're all friends. I think we have to say that.
Yeah, I was also thinking that's a
good
good place.
That's
That's a good place to start.
Right, it's a good place to start. We're all friends. So the story behind this is we did record an episode together at my place, and
The topic of conversation.
yeah, it was going well. I think we were just kind of chatting.
Just casual.
Then something happened.
We discovered.
So we discovered that we have some differing opinions on some things.
Yeah, and what's crazy is, like Zishaan and I were talking, we agree on 95% of any kind of philosophical takes that people could have when it comes to religion or anything outside of politics.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think
Literally you could mention anything.
I think that's a testament, though, to say that we can coexist. We can actually be friends. We can go out. We can do stuff. We can chat and have fun and things without agreeing on everything 100%.
Yeah.
Which is great. I think it's great because it keeps each other sharp, because we don't know everything.
Yeah, and we're gonna be just as good as friends.
Exactly.
Often as before.
Exactly. When we did that
Nothing's gonna
recording,
change.
when we
Yeah.
actually did that recording, straight afterwards and the camera stopped, we started
right back
joking
to
around
shooting
about
shit.
some nonsense, right, that would get us fired from all of our jobs. So,
Yeah. Let's keep that out the camera shot.
oh no, it's Virgin. It is Virgin. It is Virgin, and it's been in almost every single podcast recording I've done. So it's kind of a brand now at this point.
It's tradition.
Yes, Virgin. Once again. Yeah, it's Virgin. It's Virgin. So yeah, in the spirit of us being friends, I think we should have a safe word.
A safe word.
So that we know we can hit a pause, just, and I don't know, what should the safe word be?
Pineapple.
Pineapples.
Going
Okay.
traditional.
All right, let's hit it. Pineapples. Okay, so we did pick something for us to debate here. There's two sides. Deuel feels strongly about one. Zishaan feels strongly about the other. I would like to try and just to keep myself sharp as well, because I know I have a bias towards Deuel. So I want to try and jump on both sides and see if I can, from my outside perspective, because I'm not well versed in any of this stuff. I think from the WhatsApp group, my questions and stuff, it was all over the place. I don't know the shit. So I'm going to try and look at it from an objective perspective. Maybe it'll even help the viewers from the perspective they're coming from also. So I can help be a channel as well. So I'll jump on both sides, something of a mediator between you two. So Deuel, you guys picked a particular...
Yeah, so I feel pretty strongly about libertarianism as a political philosophy. I want to say, so I haven't, as a caveat, obviously, just to safeguard myself from making a fool of myself, I haven't really discussed or done research on these things as of late, but I know I'm fairly well versed, I think, enough to at least hold my own grounding. So when it comes to libertarianism, my understanding of it is that life, liberty, and property. So when you think about those aspects of it's liberty, property, and something else. But essentially, those are what needs to be protected when it comes to government. So when you think about a government, what is their main responsibility? I would like it so that they have as little responsibility as possible in order for them to have the least... It doesn't give them room to mess up, right? Because if you have responsibility over something that's small, then you can hopefully take care of that. As we know, most governments can't do the most basic of functions. But I think that's because we are giving them too much responsibility. So when it comes to liberty and property, it's giving... Government should only step in when it comes to harming someone else. So one person harming another person. So if it's a very radical stance that I take when it comes to, let's say, drugs. I think it shouldn't be illegal at all to consume or to sell any drugs. I think you should be able to go to a clinic and order meth if you like. Whether that messes with your now your employer may have a different stance on that, and then you sign a contract that says, hey, I want to work for you, and therefore I can't take these substances. That's okay. Then that's because of your job. But the government shouldn't step in. And the reason I say that is because then you end up having police having to enforce these rules that are made by the government. And then we get black markets because a lot of these things are going to be sold in any case, whether we like it or not. And that feeds into the black market economy.
So I have a question in response to that. So, for example, being able to sell any kind of narcotic on an open market, obviously in the name of personal liberty and doing whatever you feel you want to do. I mean, what would you say in response if people are now just selling meth to whoever? I mean, including, I don't know, school children, and they're getting addicted and they're dropping out. And so are there some kind of regulations? Like, okay, we can sell drugs, but we can't sell them to children. But then that's now a rule that the government needs to enforce.
Kids are under a different rule set as far as liberty comes. We don't allow kids a lot of liberty. We curb them on a lot of society. We don't.
And would you disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah. I think, if a parent decides, I want my kid to be allowed to go buy meth, okay, then I think that's why we have that rule set as to, okay, everybody under the age of 18, let's say, or 21 is not allowed to do certain things. The same way alcohol is prohibited. Not to say that kids under the age of 18 don't drink in any way.
So my question really is, in the name of personal liberty, what kind of benefit is there to society to allowing narcotics onto an open market?
Well, it's like
how does society benefit from that?
I was mentioning the black market. So you take that feed, that money that goes into them, you take that power you're taking away from them, as well as regulation. So if you think about a company that is now, okay, I went with meth as just like a drastic thing, but let's take weed as an example, right? As we see now, South Africa is moving to more decriminalization, right? So what's happening is people are now not giving to the drug dealers anymore, taking that money and giving to shop owners who own these stores, who now want to keep their have a responsibility to their customer base. And now the plants they grow, the stores they keep, all of that is now not regulated by a corporate body, but regulated by themselves, knowing if they produce bad product for their customers have somewhere else to go. Because it's legal, you find all these shops popping up.
That's good and well, but what I'm confused about is that you opened with saying that you believe any narcotic of any kind should be able to be legally sold on an open market. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So my question is, we're not talking about selling chocolates or something on an open market, which doesn't necessarily harm anyone. What we're talking about is like destructive substances that actively harm people. So why? I'm trying to understand how this.
Right. So how does it harm people?
Brings any good?
Can I ask? So Zishaan, is it essentially Deuel is posing that there's certain freedoms in society that we have, and it comes with its pushbacks and stuff. So it makes you question, well, if it's giving so many negatives, why are you fighting so hard for it?
Exactly.
And should we even keep it?
Right. So what else?
Actually, before keep that in mind, right? Just to set the scene, because I think we jumped in. But what was our problem statement that we discussed? It was
to my knowledge, it was socialism and libertarianism.
Are we going with that? I remember we went and we changed it, but then we'll keep it
so that's
socialism.
Socialism and libertarian.
That's fine. Yeah. So essentially, That's my understanding of where Zishaan's coming from.
Yeah. So if you think about
Maybe
the
Zishaan
harms
just
of
bring it a bit closer.
drugs, what do they pose at the moment? You think that we shouldn't take up all this time on drugs, but
Yeah.
essentially, the harms of drugs at the moment is that when it gets sold to somebody, they stand the risk of killing themselves, right? Overdosing, and further than that, it's now feeding that black market, as I mentioned, and lastly, it's when you take drugs, you affect the people around you, right? So when it starts to affect the people around you, that's when the laws step in, because, as I said, that's what the government should be there for, just to protect one entity from harming another. Right?
I'm really sorry, but I'm really failing to understand what the point of this is. I don't get what the benefit of allowing narcotics onto an open market. I don't see what you're trying to argue here.
When you allow that, then you have
So what happens
Less-
in your mind? That's good.
less overdosing, less money flowing into the black market
Why would there be
economy.
less overdosing from
Well,
more
you look at
easy
Switzerland and
access
Portugal.
to drugs?
You look at Switzerland and Portugal, what they've done with heroin in Switzerland, as an example, when they legalized heroin and they made these heroin facilities, clinics, and all these people that were now addicted could now come in and take heroin and then leave. But now, because they were taking it legally and they weren't being prosecuted in the court of law and getting put in jail by police and feeding all that responsibility onto the courts, this was now a social health rather than a fight when it comes to guns and weapons and feeding for their money. And so you got so much less overdosing because people now could come into these clinics and take an amount that didn't kill them, as well as the needles they were using. So it was safer in terms of diseases and such. Yeah, so that was my point when it comes to self-harm.
Okay.
Never mind. I mean, if you want to, I'm of the opinion that if you want to harm yourself, there's limits to it, right? So you shouldn't be able to kill yourself for no good reason. Euthanasia, when it comes to, I'm a chronic cancer patient and I choose no longer to take treatment, that's a different story. Whereas going into a clinic and saying, I would like some heroin that doesn't end my life, I think that should be allowed.
So, sure, you can argue that there'd be less overdosing, but
it's a fact.
Would these people not still be getting addicted to what is a harmful substance that harms you in the long term?
What happened in Switzerland as well is that people now weren't doing criminal acts in order to get access to people's TVs to sell, to now go and buy the heroin and feed the black market. Instead, they went into these clinics, got their heroin doses, and then went to work.
Sure, but I'm talking about long-term, what happens to these people who are consistently
long-term, there was less
taking
crime,
heroin?
and people...
No, in terms of health.
In terms of health, they took less heroin.
Okay.
They took less heroin because now they didn't need to hide in the shadows. They could... they were accepted by the community as, hey, you need help, but I understand that you're not going to just be fixed in a day.
Okay, I must say I do highly doubt the credibility over someone taking an addictive substance and somehow needing less in the future.
So it's not the substance that's addictive. The problem is within yourself.
Wait, so you're saying heroin isn't addictive?
Heroin is addictive, but
Okay.
it as far as chemically goes, heroin, meth, there is a chemical that brings you back to it. That's like nicotine and cigarettes. But people quit cigarettes all the time, right? And they have a reason for quitting that, and their reason is generally health, right? But they need to be motivated to quit, right? So if you're addicted to the substance, what motives do you have?
Well, I think typically the motive that you have to get off of an addictive substance is the detriment that it's bringing to your life. So many cigarette smokers
You're right.
quit cigarettes because the use of the substance is affecting their bodies. So that's what I'm saying.
Is that true though?
What?
Because there's a lot of people that do some really crappy stuff to themselves, and they can see the effects on themselves, but it makes
That's
no
overcome by
difference.
the addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in this scenario where you've legalized it and you've accepted these people into your community, it's easier for them to leave these addictive substances. Give that case versus trying to leave it while you're not accepted by the community. You walk into a place to try and get a job, and they look at you like you're a druggie, and they send you off and find someone else.
Well, sure, no, that's something different. So I would agree with you on that case in the sense that we shouldn't be turning drug addicts into outcasts from society. And yes, there should be efforts to rehabilitate them. I don't think there should be efforts to facilitate increased usage of harmful substances. I absolutely do not agree with that.
Is it increased usage?
It's not. You're not.
Well, when you
facilitating
make it more accessible to people and you give them an easy means to use it, would you not use more of it?
No, what happens is a society becomes more educated on the substance instead of it being put into this. It's taken out of the shadows. As you put the cure to a lot of these things is just having people be informed about it, right?
Okay.
And so if people are more informed about what these substances do, what happens when you take them, and not being, it's like a child. If you tell the child, don't take it because I said so, the child has now become curious about what is this reason as to why you are saying this. I shouldn't walk down this path.
So would you say that in our current society, we don't educate people as to why drugs are bad? So do you think maybe children don't understand what drugs do to people? Or?
I don't think they know enough. I think,
Okay.
and I think if you had, I don't think people know enough, never mind children. If you had, if somebody thinks about a heroin addict, the first thing they think is somebody lying on the streets, throwing away their life. But they're not necessarily doing that because of their heroin addiction. There's generally other reasons that come with that, mental health,
The personality also has an effect. It takes a certain personality to become addicted to a certain substance, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's not only education. Perhaps it's the personality of the person as well.
I think also personality aside, I think you observe drug usage being more rampant in societies that are more poverty-stricken. So I think naturally you have increased drug usage as a result of several socioeconomic factors as well. Putting personality and
I'm
other
glad you
factors
brought up
aside.
socioeconomic factors because we spent some time on the narcotics, but I think we should also
Yeah, that's
transition
also
into
a
the
good
meat
switch.
of
As to how, so if I'm
differences.
arguing for libertarianism, what I'm saying is that allowing free market to reign brings more people out of poverty, right? And my argument for that stems from innovation and people being given the opportunity to work for something and being allowed to keep the something they worked for
Cool.
as their own property. Yeah.
So the basis of my argument is that socialism as a political system is the only system that has been capable of meeting the basic necessities to live a dignified life historically, especially when it comes to underdeveloped nations. Socialism is the only political ideology that has ever delivered on this successfully without exploitation.
Where?
In several, if you look at the Soviet Union, for example, they had universal healthcare. They fixed what was...
These were promises.
No, they were not. They were succeeded in. I think you just don't know about them. But anyway, so the Soviet Union firstly had full employment.
Mm-hmm.
The second was a massive public housing initiative that solved a homelessness crisis in the Soviet Union. And you must remember that the Soviet Union, prior to the Russian Revolution in 1917, was a primarily agrarian society filled with illiterate peasants. And it was the power of socialism that transformed them into a world superpower and propelled them onto the world stage in under 30 years. And it only did this through public housing initiatives, universal healthcare, things like this, essential public services that you need to develop a country and make them productive.
Okay, so I think you both kind of opened up with how you feel about, your own socialism, libertarianism. Here's what I want you guys to do, right? And it won't be long. It's just something interesting to get into the shoes of the other person that I've seen works really well long term. So, Deuel, what I want you to do is to just take a little bit of time just to get into Zishaan's shoes and explain what is the potential benefit for the sort of political system he's vouching for.
Yeah, so I think from my understanding, socialism is a centralized government that controls the means of production and decides who does what and who reaps the benefit from that.
There is a key distinction to be made, though, in trying to define socialism as simply state control over the economy. Because primarily socialism is concerned with the working class, or what Marx calls the industrial proletariat, having democratic control over the economy, usually through using the state as an instrument to exert that. So it's not, for example, if you look at our present capitalist society, it's not about handing over sole power to a capitalist government. It's about the working classes organizing themselves as a state and democratically deciding on what to produce, how to produce it, and how to distribute it. It's about the workers owning the means of production.
What do you think is the benefit of that?
I think when you have a head deciding where everybody needs to go, it's easy to get there because you don't have opposing views. You don't have other people arguing, no, we should go in this direction instead of this one. Everybody just leads down this path, and it's all steam ahead. And you get to that end goal faster. So I do think that's a nice benefit of socialism.
Perhaps you also get to involve the voices of the people that normally don't get to speak about their struggles and their difficulties.
Yes,
right?
Because the basic tenet of Marxism is that the working class faces exploitation by the ruling classes, which is why after 1917, when the revolution in Russia was successful, Lenin declared all power to the Soviets. So Soviet is a Russian word that means workers' councils. So now what you had, instead of a Tsarist autocracy, which was oppressing the working classes, what you have is now workers democratically deciding what to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute it. What do we need in our economy? We need education, we need healthcare, we need housing. And so we produce according to what we need.
Okay.
As a society.
Let me ask you now, Zishaan, what do you think are the potential pitfalls of a system like that?
The potential pitfalls, I would say...
Okay, wait, before we go into the pitfalls, because I have some,
No, I get, so your rebuttals.
No, more the
add-ons.
What do you see libertarian as?
So we'll get to that. I wanted to cover what are the good and the bad of both sides, just so we're both kind of warmed up.
Before we do that, could I just expound on what I understand libertarianism to be? So essentially, my understanding of libertarianism is that it's essentially neoliberal capitalism, but with even more of an emphasis on less state control of the economy. Is that correct?
No. So you're now talking about anarcho-capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not really that. It's more... allowing government to have less control, but what that does is it gives the people the ability to sort of so anarcho-capitalism, from what I understand, it's letting the free market reign,
Okay.
sort of no regulations at all.
Okay, so
Here you have regulations, but it's the people that decide the regulations. So it's,
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I'd just like to ask, so when you say the people are deciding,
yeah, the customers.
for example, you work for a company.
Yeah.
You have absolutely no say in what shareholders
Yeah,
decide
it's not
to
the
do with
workers
that
that
company.
decide, it's the customers
the
that
market.
decide.
The customers.
Yes,
Customers also have no say in what shareholders do.
they do.
They
They
do,
have say
right?
with their money.
No,
And
but
how they spend it.
ultimately, shareholders can move production around whenever they want. We call this the mobilization of capital. So, for example, in South Africa, say we have a large private sector and suddenly we have more stringent labor laws. They can, even if customers in South Africa don't want it to happen, they can quite literally pack up and go to another country, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. We don't have a say in what they do with their capital, even though our lives are literally dependent on it. So in that sense, I don't see how the people are deciding anything.
So
The
if they
owners
pack up,
decide.
then the customers have nowhere to spend their money, but they still need the good. Doesn't another company then come up and take that role
No, but remember
gives
the
opportunity for?
primary, what do you call it, the catalyst I'm saying is as a more stringent labor market. And that is the one thing that capitalists do not like, is a more stringent labor market that has more worker protections. So what I'm saying is I don't think anyone would just come in to invest in a place like that, which is why I would say that they would mobilize their capital and go somewhere else where there's less labor protections.
Okay, but we were
Right,
talking,
but I
we're
don't
talking
want
more about
more labor protections.
We're talking. Okay, you're on the worker side. We're talking more about the market deciding whether or not they want a product, and in that way, your shareholders, their hands are tied because they can only operate in these parameters, but they have to produce a good that the customer will buy. So in that way, the market can control
But
that
they
company.
don't need to produce it here. They can find someone else in another country
Yeah,
who wants
Right,
it.
but it's more.
Yeah,
it's not-
sure.
I'm not
Produce it.
arguing for more stringent labor laws or
No,
right.
no,
So
of course not.
that situation doesn't really work for my
Mm.
case. What I'm saying is that if let's take this scenario, right? You have a company that's polluting waters, and in a libertarian society, the way I see it, is that this company is held responsible by the customers, who then say, "How can you pollute these waters?" And law firms are able to now take the people who are being polluted in that case and allowed to sue that company. Maybe they sue them so badly that they go out of business and a new company takes place and learn from the lessons of the old.
See, so that's all good and well, but my point is, why do we need it to reach a point where companies are kind of free to just pollute? Because if the means of production were democratically controlled by the people, by the workers, we wouldn't be polluting our own waters.
See, that's what you think would happen. But what actually happens, if you look at the Soviet Union, how the disregard they have for deforestation, and look at China at the moment. They are the highest producing when it comes to CO2 and pollution in the world. China kicks everybody's ass, and that's because they don't care about other people's. They care about their goal. They want to reach that goal at all costs. And so everybody else also just agrees with that.
But I wouldn't say that China is a purely socialist economy because of the market reforms that they underwent with Deng Xiaoping during the 70s and 80s. So I wouldn't say they're a fully planned economy.
Right, but they're the closest example we have, wouldn't you say?
Do we have an example where the socialist experiment played out and is still existing today and is
I
prospering?
would say because Vietnam and China still retained, not retained, but embraced market reforms during the 70s and 80s, I'd say the only valid one would probably be Cuba, that's retained themselves as a Marxist-Leninist state.
See, and China needed to do that in the first place because what they had going wasn't working.
I wouldn't say necessarily, but I
Then why
think
would they need to change it?
the main issue with the reason that they needed to embrace market reforms is that it becomes extremely difficult when you're now one socialist state in a hostile world. it becomes extremely difficult to actually develop yourself.
Right. So what you're saying is, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If the world is not socialist, then socialism doesn't work.
It becomes significantly more difficult to work. And I think that a lot of socialist states, especially like Yugoslavia, really flourished during the 60s and 70s because they had support from each other.
Right. So
Deuel, if it was flipped around, would a capitalist,
right.
if
So
it was just one small-
not capitalist, but a libertarian
was-
society.
Right.
Why
I
do you
think it
make
works.
such a distinction between those two?
Okay,
Because
wait.
people have an idea of capitalism in their minds, and they look at America, and America is not libertarian at all. America loves to touch the Middle East, and they love to plant their weapons around the world and feed their own economy by producing guns, producing tanks, producing bullets.
But is that not the free market, the absolute freedom to do what you want to do?
Right, that's if you think about a company that produces guns, sure, but a company that produces guns going into another country and selling them guns, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm saying that America at the moment deploys their troops as Americans into other countries.
But that is part
Right,
of
so
my argument with regard to...
My distinction with libertarianism is Switzerland, who says, I'm neutral in this. You guys fight over there, all good. The only thing I'm going to do as Switzerland is protect myself. I don't plant bases anywhere. I don't, So that's the difference. My military is strictly to protect myself and to keep my state sovereign. And everybody inside Switzerland then keeps themselves protected as well.
Sure, I can agree with that. I'm sure we share the same perspective on war being bad.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing is that capitalism demands imperialism and exploitation, which is something
I'm
that
not arguing for capitalism.
You see, I feel you're being very pedantic about separating this, but ultimately, if libertarianism still has private property and a free market, it is just capitalism. You can use whatever word you want.
Really?
You can use whatever synonym.
Private
That's
property
interesting.
and the free market. So
That is the epitome of capitalism.
That's very interesting. You throw it in the bucket if it shares those qualities as capitalism.
That is what.
So how does
capitalism is.
private property and the free market lead to war?
Because in order to be the top player in the free market, you see, profit is the only rule of a free market. It's not based on social good or welfare. It's profit.
Okay, so
That's the same reason that during times of war, defense companies make massive amounts of money because selling guns is profitable.
is profitable, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I see the way you're seeing it, but that's because you're seeing it as America, who is a free market, needs to stay on top of the other free markets.
And that is exactly what they do.
So what I'm saying is, if you diminish America and give them less responsibility over Americans, allowing it to be a more libertarian state than a capitalist state, America doesn't have the ability to just decide, okay, we need to rule the world. Instead, it becomes more about the companies within America trying to be profitable and beating each
But
other.
the companies within America directly benefit from American imperialist efforts. Because you must remember, when we talk about the
But
ruling
they
class,
wouldn't be. You see, you're seeing it as still this government that decides, this overruling entity.
when I say ruling class, I'm not talking about the government. I'm referring to the capitalist class as a whole.
Yeah, but how does the capitalist class as a whole decide that we need to without a government?
They don't decide anything in that sense, but I think the ruling classes obviously have the most say in what the government does and how they do it. It's called corporate lobbying, which is why so many political parties that get into power are always funded by certain corporate interests.
Yeah.
And even if you look at the rise of fascism during Nazi Germany,
No,
the only
lobbies is
way that the Nazis were propelled onto the national stage was because they were backed by corporate interests that funded the Nazi party because they wanted them in power.
Yes, but that's because the power brought them something. What I'm saying, if you take away the power of the government, there would be no incentive to lobby the government in the first place, because the government has no power. They have no control. If you gave the government little power over the people, less power over the people, then there would be no incentive to lobby the government in the first place.
But the thing is, so as Marxists, we understand the state as a tool of class warfare to be
Yes.
used by one class to oppress another.
And that's not the way I see.
That's all
That
good
at all,
and that's
yeah.
all good and well, right? But what Marx called the state was the committee for managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie or the ruling class. And that is exactly what it does, because the empowerment of the state tool is directly beneficial to the interests of the ruling class. That's what all of this exploitation, all this expansionism, all
I
this
agree.
militarism does.
Yeah.
It empowers the ruling class, it makes them wealthier, it makes them more powerful. So sure, you can say that the state should have less power, and that's perfectly fine, but the ruling classes demand that the state must have more power to do these things because it empowers them.
In how do they demand that? Because it's a feedback cycle. You're saying the government empowers the ruling class, and the ruling class empowers the government.
No, the ruling class empowers the government to perform their will, to exert their will over society and over the world at large. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, well, I'm saying, who gave that government the power in the first place to do that?
Well, the way we understand it is that the state only exists as an apparatus that can arise in a society in which there is class warfare taking place. And the primary role of the state is to hold class antagonisms in check. So under a capitalist society, the role of the state is very much to protect capital and to keep it safe and protected from revolt. That's the way we understand.
And that's my problem with it. I don't think that should be the responsibility of the state. The state should protect one from harming another. That's where I started with my...
That's great, and we absolutely agree on that.
Yeah,
but it's just
but
not the
nothing
reality
else.
of how states work.
Yeah, and I could make the same argument for the socialist state that you're putting across. That's just not how that has ever worked. So we're both living in this...
How has it not worked? What would you say?
Well, it's like I was mentioning with China, right? So, and their pollution and how they have such disregard for the earth. And it's not... I mean, if you have a state that controls that, and they decide, okay, well, this forest isn't necessary, no matter what the people think. I know you're saying that the people are the state, but that's not how we've seen it work in the past. We've seen a couple of guys decide that this is the way it's going to be done, and the rest fall in line.
But I think you're
If you
ignoring...
look at Chernobyl,
What about Chernobyl?
and how that ended up the way it is because the state couldn't give enough resources to that facility, and then that has caused insane amounts of damage to the environment around it.
Look, I'll choose not to engage you on Chernobyl because I don't know all the facts about
Okay.
what happened. But I do think it is disingenuous to imply that there is no democratic participation in a socialist state. Because, I mean, like Leon Trotsky quite literally said, communism needs democracy the way the human body needs oxygen. So I don't necessarily think that there's just a state that kind of does whatever it wants. There is working class participation within that state, I would say more so than what you would ever have under capitalism. I would say the communes and the workers' councils that we saw in the Soviet Union were far more democratic than anything we've seen under capitalism. And I'm not saying that over time the Soviet Union did become more bureaucratized, but what I'm saying is that the basis of those institutions are in fact democratic. I don't see it as a bunch of guys just doing whatever.
I do, because there's also... How do you explain the famine in the Soviet
The
Union?
Holodomor, is that what you're referring to?
The
Holodomor, the famine in Ukraine, is that what you're referring
no. I'm thinking about the amount of starvation that took place during the Soviet Union, and I know
to?
from
When and where?
when and where.
Yes. Which famines are you referring to? Because I'm assuming you're referring to the Holodomor because it's the most well-known one.
Okay. If we had to go with that one,
I find it interesting, Zishaan, that you say that
the Bolsheviks.
we haven't seen a good example of your system because there hasn't been.
I never said that.
Okay, but you mentioned that it hasn't worked properly because the world isn't that way.
No, I
The world
didn't
doesn't
say that
follow
they didn't work properly. I'm just saying that it becomes increasingly difficult for them to work properly when they get cut off from the
So it
social
can't
tree.
work okay. It
That's
becomes
what I said.
difficult to work properly.
Mm.
Is that why we haven't seen a working system like that?
I think we have in the past, but we'll get more into that just now. I want to.
The
know
reason why I'm
about-
asking is because it goes back to one of my earlier questions where it's like, what are the downsides? And I think it's important to put up the good side and the bad side of these systems. And I'm just wondering from your side, what are the potential pitfalls of your system? Because I'm sure there are many.
Well, I would say, to be as honest as possible, I would say that it is possible for a socialist system to be plagued by inefficiencies. I would say that's one, but I think that's something that can definitely be mitigated by the nature of the institutions we build socialism around. And I believe that is up to the working class and the type of institutions that we build around socialism.
So
I don't think they're necessarily fixed in that sense.
okay, so but then your answer is just it depends, and it
But
could
wait,
be patched.
I'm not debating with you, am I?
No. I'm asking. I'm trying to establish what you see as the potential pitfalls, because we've already seen. Okay, but Deuel has listed that it's not capitalism he's defending, but
But again, I have a massive problem with that, because libertarianism, as long as this ideology espouses free markets and private property, that is capitalism. And I feel using synonyms to try and dance around what we're actually talking about here is a little bit disingenuous, in my opinion. I think it's certainly a form of capitalism. Private property is intrinsic to capitalism, which is why the ideology of socialism vouches for socially controlled property and not private property.
Okay. Okay, so your definition of capitalism is you being able to hold private property, and that's why you're throwing in libertarianism in that bucket.
It's not my definition. That is the objective definition of capitalism. You can Google that right now if you want to.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's why you're saying libertarianism is in that bucket.
Yes, it 100% is a form of
This
capitalism.
is touching on something that I want us to go on to. It's more the fundamental aspect of the fundamental difference between you guys. But first, I want you to just, I don't know if Deuel, you can finish off this trail
Yeah.
we're
So
on, then we can hop onto that.
Chinese history between 1958 and the early 1960 to organize China's vast population, especially in large.
I find it very interesting that like the fundamental difference is freedom then
In what sense?
to choose.
Freedom to choose in terms of?
Just to choose how you want your life to go versus the potential downfall of society if you go that route. And that's what this tug of war is. It's being able to ask the question, at what point should you stop thinking about yourself and should you consider other people? And at what point should you consider yourself as well? Like that's the back and forth.
Well, the thing is, though, I don't feel you can be an individualist if you live in a society and are dependent on the labor of others for your survival. Then I don't think we can kind of just be, oh, well, I'm the only thing that matters and I just need to take care of myself.
I don't think that's the right way to do it
That's-
either. I don't think we should just
Yeah,
think,
that's not what I'm
it's just us for
arguing for either.
ourselves.
So yeah, China
Agreed.
between the 1958 and 1962, Mao's Great Famine.
I know about that.
Yeah, 45 million
Oh,
people
Mao.
died due
Isn't
to
that the-
starvation, forced labor.
What
and
was Mao
political
then?
purges.
Was it a Marxist society?
Mao Zedong.
Mao's
is
China.
Yes.
It was.
Yes.
Wasn't that bad?
No.
Absolutely.
Mao is China.
There's a lot of that was good about it is
45 million people
many
died
people
due to
died?
starvation.
now,
forced
first of all, I think where we get those statistics are very important. But there is something I'd like to touch on briefly, which is the fact that China has historically been ravaged by famine even before the revolution, to the point where they were averaging about 3 to 4 famines a year. Now, I find it very disingenuous to kind of try and discredit some of Mao's achievements by saying this many million people died, which again is a very unreliable statistic, because China had one famine under socialist control, and after which they achieved food security and have not had a famine since. And I think that's something very important to consider.
Right, but they achieved that by changing the way they were doing things. They didn't continue their production of, when one entity decides, okay, we control the means of production, and you're not letting customers decide, okay, this is what we need, and therefore this is what we're going to pay for. When you take that ability away from the individual, and you decide, no, this is actually what we need. As a whole, this is what everybody needs. You find wastage, because now we end up producing things that we don't use.
That is exactly what happens under capitalism. Do you know how much useless stuff we produce? How much food is wasted
Food
every
is
single
wasted
year?
because people spend money on it, and then it's wasted. But the money being spent in the first place is them deciding that they need
No,
it.
but I'm saying, like, if you look at all of what restaurants, fast food chains, everything, they have a ton of leftover food at the end of every day, and they throw it all away, despite the fact that that food could be used to feed people. So I would say that capitalism, because it doesn't have a democratically planned economy, produces an immense amount of wastage.
See, I see the wastage if you take a socialist society that decides, okay, we need this much, shouldn't they be able to then feed more people, because now they know how it needs to be produced, but that's not what end up how it needs to be dispersed. But that's not what ends up happening. Instead, you find more people starving, more people lacking.
I completely disagree with that, because collectivization did very much work and achieve in helping the population be fed. It very much did do that. So I don't think it's fair to take the two examples of famines, especially when famines happened far more even before the revolutions, and then say, oh my goodness, socialism just causes famine, when a lot of these countries did actually achieve food security and did manage to feed and house more people than ever before those revolutions.
If you look at, okay, let's take America. America, if you, as a capitalist state, because you're saying that what I'm arguing for is capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so, but...
What is capitalism to you?
I mean, okay, I Googled the definition of capitalism. An economical and political system in which countries, trade, and industry are controlled by private owners for profit.
Private property and profit. Free market. There we go.
Right.
So you want all of that. You want a free market. You want profit because you believe it leads to innovation. Yeah. And you want private property.
Yeah, if you look at
America... So
America...
what you're arguing for is capitalism.
What I'm arguing for is libertarianism, because when people hear capitalism, they think of America, and then when you think of America, then you tie all of their warmongering to that as well. That's why I don't like to attach myself to capitalism.
It's fine. You can not want to attach yourself to capitalism, but what you're fundamentally debating is capitalism, as you have just proven by what you've looked up.
Yes, right? So if you look at America and what problems they have an obesity problem. They have too much food.
I wouldn't say they have too much food. I think they have too much bad quality food.
Right, but everybody's getting fed. Right, so...
I mean, there's still a lot of homelessness in America.
There's a homelessness, but that's people... I mean, if you look at America's homeless problem, that's a mental health issue.
Where does mental health issues come from?
You tell me?
I would say primarily they're driven by socioeconomic factors. They don't just pop out of thin air.
I think every society has a certain amount of people that suffer from the same level of mental health issues, and then...
And what do all these societies have in common?
So you're telling me there's no social there's no social health issues in Russia or China?
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's significantly less, because when people are not living in a society where they constantly need to be afraid of losing their job and then losing their houses as a result of that, there is significantly less mental health issues.
I think the idea there is like your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? As soon as you meet the bottom, you can now, develop yourself as a person mentally and go up the chain.
Right, that's because you've been told what to do and where to go.
And you
No, but I think the idea is, correct me if I'm wrong, you're covering the basic needs and you're allowing the person to walk up that ladder.
So this thing about covering the basic needs of everybody, right? So if you have a society that, let's say, everybody or a large portion of the population is being fed, but there's no increase in innovation, so there's no things aren't getting better, they're just remaining the same. We're maintaining the same level of
But why
quality.
are you assuming that a society in which basic
Because that's
needs
the
are
only
met,
thing we've seen.
why would you say that when the Soviet Union was literally the first country that achieved a space flight? They were the first people in space.
Right, that was because they were being challenged.
Was that not a consequence of competition, or was
Yes.
it just intrinsic?
But I mean, what I'm saying is that clearly socialist societies are capable of innovation, and they're not
Right,
just
only
these
if pushed
static.
by a capitalist state.
I wouldn't agree with that. Because what you're assuming is that once basic needs are met, we're not going to just find more efficient ways of doing things, and I feel
Well,
that's
basic
just
needs are
extremely-
never just met.
What
Right?
do you mean?
There's always a certain portion of the population that doesn't get. Right?
How though?
Even in
Because-
your perfect world.
It's not a perfect one. I never said socialism
Right.
is some kind of utopia, but I think it's a lot better than what those states were before. Because what I'm saying about the Soviet Union,
I can agree with that. I can agree with that. My thing that I'm saying is it's not better than a society in which people decide what to do with their own money. So they control what they produce. Right? And
but
they
that is
decide
exactly
where-
what I'm arguing for. That's socialism. The workers democratically deciding what they produce, how they produce it, and how to distribute it.
Right,
And
but
what I'm saying is that is
you-
not how capitalism works.
well, how do you say the workers decide? Like how? Because what I'm saying is that you as an individual get to decide that of your own means of production. So you produce something, you get money, you decide where it's spent.
Yes, that is. I don't see what the difference is. But what do you think socialism is then?
Yeah,
Because you
I don't
have
know, a
what
group
you
of
have-
people who produce one thing and then they decide where that one thing goes.
No, because you must understand, even in the Soviet Union where we had the workers' council system, what you have is, for example, metal workers are going to come together democratically and they decide, okay, how much metal do we need to produce? And we're going to produce that much. That's literally all it is. So I think what you're trying to do is you're looking at a socialist state as just kind of being these brutal despots that are kind of willing to hang on to power by any means necessary. I just kind of want to oppress everyone, which I don't think is the case.
I think a lot of people share that sentiment, and I don't think it's because they necessarily have something against the systems you're proposing. I think it's just that, sure, humans don't have the longest history as far as our modern societies are concerned, but what we do have, the last couple 100 years, haven't seen it working really well.
But the thing is, right, you can say that, but I do believe that everything both of you know about socialism or think you know about socialism is very informed by a lot of McCarthy-era Cold War propaganda. In the sense that you kind of look at the centralization of power that's taken place in socialist states and you say, oh my, this is an intrinsic feature of socialism. This is just how it works, right? But then you fail to take into account what happens when these states don't centralize power. They get destroyed. They get overthrown. If you look at Nicaragua...
I could say the same thing,
just
though,
wait, let
about
me finish.
capitalism.
When we look at Nicaragua, for example, what happened after the revolution? The Americans immediately started training and funding the Contras to overthrow that government. How do you defend yourself? You have to centralize power and create a strong militarized state to protect yourself. It is directly a consequence of capitalist encirclement that socialist states have had to centralize their power in order to defend their countries. If the Americans and the Europeans were not constantly poking their noses everywhere, trying to overthrow governments and trying to overthrow people that wanted to walk away from capitalism, we would not need centralized states and centralized tools of power to protect them. That is my key point. Centralization doesn't pop out of thin air. It's a direct response to external factors.
Right, so I could say the same thing about the way you see capitalism, is that it needs to exist in which the ruling class empowers the government and the government
Does its will.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's because of what you've seen of capitalism, right? But I'm saying it doesn't need to be that way. And you're saying it doesn't need to be that way when it comes to, let's say, Cuba, right? So what I'm discovering is that we're both arguing for theoretical ideas of our philosophy, and we're attacking each other for real-world examples of our philosophy in which it hasn't worked. And I think if you look at the real-world examples, it's because I'm saying that in my real-world example of libertarianism and capitalism, they don't need to overthrow other ruling nations. They can just exist as an entity on its own. But you're saying they haven't done that. What they've done is suppress other nations and say, you need to follow our free market rule.
So
and on the opposite end is, I'm saying you need the world to fall in line with your communism, with your socialism.
Well, you need the world to fall in line with capitalism as well.
I don't think you do.
Of course you do. Because every time throughout history, when people have tried to walk away from it, what has happened?
I know that's what's happened, but think about it. I don't think it needs to be that way. Like, I don't think the United States needs to, Saudi Arabia needs our freedom, and then they come
Do you
there.
think your Switzerland example can exist the way you're talking about?
I mean, Switzerland does exist.
But the point that you fail to take into account is that Switzerland, as part of a country that's part of the imperial core in Europe, directly benefits from these military interventions and imperialism.
Then how do they stay neutral?
Sorry?
How do they stay so neutral?
I'm just saying they benefit from it. But what you fail to take into account is the neocolonial power structures that exist and how countries in I think it's Scandinavia? Yeah. Sweden, Norway, that's Scandinavia, right? So in the Scandinavian countries, how they directly benefit from imperialism and neocolonialism. So just a few interesting points, right? So this comes from a study conducted by Jason Hickel, professor of anthropology at Autonomous University of Barcelona, and Felix Barber, research assistant at Beja Institute of Ecological Economics. So the basic premise is that researchers have argued that wealthy nations rely on a large net appropriation of labor and resources from the rest of the world through unequal exchange in international trade and global commodity chains. So this includes countries, you say, that are completely neutral and not exploiting anyone, like Sweden, Norway, the rest, right? So a very interesting stat I'd like to provide you with is, despite contributing 90 to 91% of the total labor that goes into global production and the production of traded goods in 2021, including the majority of high-skilled labor, the global south, so that includes Africa, Latin America, South America, India, Southeast Asia, the global south received less than half, 44% of global income, and southern workers received only 21% of global income in that year. In other words, while global production is overwhelmingly performed in the global south, the yields are disproportionately captured in the global north, indicating a disproportionate command of the global product. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that just because your country specifically is not putting boots in the ground and overthrowing governments, there are neocolonial power structures in place and trade imbalances that empower these nations. So just because Sweden is this cute little country with their free healthcare and free education doesn't mean that they're not directly benefiting from exploitative global structures.
Yeah, no, I can agree that there's lots of exploitation going around. But is that because? So you're saying that, like, the military in Africa from the capitalist societies are undermining the Africans' ability to charge what that product is worth that they're selling?
Well, what I'm saying is that the global structure enforced upon the world by the dominant players in the free market, which are the colonial countries such as the US, Australia, and Europe, command power over the rest of Africa and Latin America and South Asia, and continue to exploit them. So all of this so-called wealth and prosperity that you're seeing, these welfare states, these libertarian societies, haven't come out of thin air. They exist on the blood and lives of people in the global south. They exist on the appropriation of the value of
people in the
our
global
goods.
south just decided, you know what, we're not going to sell to you?
What has happened so if you look at socialist states that have decided that, Angola being prime example, what happened? US-backed coup.
Right, they're cut off from the rest of the world, right? But that's because of a problem of socialism. Socialism can't exist on its own. It needs the rest of the world to follow in line. I'm saying if Africa took the step and said, we're gonna exist on our own and only trade with other African countries and exist as a libertarian society, as a capitalist society on our own, we don't need the rest of the world.
That's fine, but I'm saying, so
Can't they
when
do
I
that?
when I talk about being cut off from trade, what I mean is that, for example, Cuba, that's been under an embargo for almost 60 years, right? They're not able to trade even with other capitalist nations. It's completely cut them off, and I think we can both agree no society can grow without trade. And socialism is by no means against trade with other countries. They have consistently traded with countries, but the problem is that a lot of them, including the Soviet Union, have always faced embargoes that have prevented them from engaging in free trade and thus developing additionally through free trade.
Yeah.
So, for example, what I'm saying is, like you're saying, why can't Africa just decide to break away from the structure? Because every time they've tried to do it, they've gotten overthrown. Even if you look at Burkina Faso and with Thomas Sankara, I mean, his government, he ruled for only 4 years, and there was a French and CIA joint-backed coup that overthrew him, killed him, and practically reversed all of the reforms that he tried to do, including, developing public services and all of that stuff. They reversed all of it, and now Burkina Faso is back to being one of the poorest countries in Africa. And so what I'm saying is that capitalism demands this. The capitalist powers that be in the world, in the imperial core, demands this to happen.
Right.
Because this is how they maintain their levels of wealth and power and dominance in the world.
I don't think it
Okay,
needs
guys,
to be
let's
that way.
let's pause
I
it
agree
there.
with you, though.
Jets,
Yeah.
let's pause it there. So we'll be back shortly. All right, we're back. We're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. So I agree with a lot of what you said there. That's actually why I've decided to distinguish myself as libertarian instead of capitalist. Because, like I was saying, when you think of capitalist societies, you think of these societies that oppress the rest of the world, that dictate what the rest of the world should follow, right? So I don't think that needs to be the case. I think you can have America exist without it needing to oppress or decide wage wars on the rest of the world. So, but I agree with you, and I hate that that's the stance that these people have taken in order to maintain their power in the world's structure. My thing is, if Africa decided now to maintain their own means of production and not try to separate themselves from how they're being abused currently, I think the better path would be libertarianism rather than socialism. And, I've stated my reasons as such.
So for me, yes, I totally agree that South Africa should break free from these colonial systems of exploitation.
Yeah.
But my issue is,
Yeah, we're on the same page.
so long as, I'm actually very glad that we are in that regard, but my issue is that so long as we have a bourgeoisie, a class of capitalists that enrich themselves off the labor of others, South Africa will not develop.
Right.
Because the fundamental problem, and this is also a very interesting statistic I'd like to bring up that comes from United Nations Water.org, and it speaks to the annual human cost of capitalism, which is 8 million people die from lack of clean water, 7,665,000 die of hunger, 3 million die from vaccine-curable disease, 500,000 die of malaria. In other words, that is 20 million easily preventable deaths annually. These people do not die because we lack the ability to solve these problems, but simply because it is not profitable to do so.
Does that include socialist society? Or is that specifically for capitalist
Capitalism,
society?
that's what we're talking about.
Sorry, that includes,
I think
that
it's
lists capitalist countries.
How is it not?
That
profitable?
article lists capitalist countries. It's a
It's
calculation
talking
done.
about annually. I'm not sure like what exactly countries it's talking
No,
about.
I just wanted to make sure that you're not averaging across socialist, communist countries also.
Well,
Like,
there aren't really any in that sense in terms of... I
They
don't-
need to adopt to the world. It's like he's saying, a socialist society can't be pure socialist for a long period
so
of
those
time.
numbers include socialist societies. That's
And
all
the
I'm
reason I
asking.
say they can't is because I don't think it's sustainable. But the reason you're saying it can't is because the other entities of the world, the capitalist entities, enforce their will on the country. Yeah, and I think that's like a different debate. But I think I don't see how it isn't profitable to bring water to everybody.
Well, I mean,
As an example,
we can look
clean
at...
water. Isn't that what
So, I mean, we can look at what you propose, which is that the market just controls everything and they allocate resources. And I think a very interesting example of that was during Margaret Thatcher's time in office in the UK. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with that. But so what Margaret Thatcher proposed was less state intervention in general in the free market and kind of just allowing the free market to operate on its own. Right? And so what that led to is there were now no more subsidies for corporations. She curbed unions and prevented workers from organizing for better rights. And primarily what Thatcher did is she sold off several SOEs like British Gas, British Telecoms, British Airways, as well as water and electrical utilities. So yes, like you're saying, things like water and electricity became sold for profit. And so what happened is that capital, as it naturally must do, concentrates and monopolies arose. Prices became high, services were inconsistent and not accessible. And I think a very interesting example of this was what happened with British Railways. So British Rail was broken into private franchises, ticket prices rose faster than inflation, delays and cancellations became common, and coordination between operators was often poor. So this is the issue I have with the free market, which is that it always devolves into absolute anarchy, in the sense that, yes, neoliberals, libertarians alike advocate for less state intervention, but the fact is that they need it. I mean, in 2008, when we had the financial crisis, what happened was the free market was actually allowed to run amok, and the whole thing eventually crashed and imploded in on itself. And then corporations suddenly that hate the government and want to just do their own thing, then they're like, oh my God, please, we need subsidies, we need bailouts, we need government bailouts. And then it's the tax money of people like you and me that need to pay for their mess ups. So
they did that because they knew that the government would come to rescue them.
well, they have to, because what happens then?
Yeah.
Society starts collapsing.
Yeah.
So this is what happens when the free market gets to just control everything.
Right, but that was debt. That was them giving out things that they didn't. They were giving out money that they didn't have to give.
Okay.
Right, so I think.
But again,
You
what
know,
would
you're
have
gonna-
stopped that is rules on the free market, which you don't seem to like. You want the free market to be able to do what it wants without the government interfering.
If the government didn't interfere and bail them out, then we would have seen now people come and not make the same mistakes they did.
What do you mean?
Not make the same mistakes they did. Because now what's going to happen is the cycle is going to repeat itself, right? those people are going to lend money that they don't have, and eventually they're going to run out of actual goods, and then they're going to need the government to bail them out, and they know the government's going to bail them out, so they'll do it again, and they'll do it again, and they'll do it again because the government interfered.
Okay, but if there was no government, there was no taxpayer money, they would have just gone bankrupt and completely collapsed. There is no trying again. So I don't really get what your point is.
My point is that they can now do that again because the government bailed them out in the first place.
Well, they can do that again because we operate in a system that allows for capital to do this. That is why they can do it again. And then we need to pay for it. When they mess up, we need to pay for it.
Right, so they were... there's lots of problems with the 2008 collapse. I mean, people weren't paying their mortgages and their bonds, yet they were still giving out. They weren't doing any background checks on people's incomes. You didn't even need an income. You could get a house. You know, my dog could get a house. That's what people were doing. They were getting houses on their dogs' names. They were getting houses on, so it was total chaos.
But isn't that what Zishaan is saying? With more legislation on that wouldn't have happened.
Right, but they were able to do that because they knew. Those housing markets were able to do that. The banks were able to do that because they knew, hey, if what's going to happen when everything collapses and because we're not getting now these payments, what's going to happen when the economy collapses?
So
well,
if there was
the government's going to save us.
Well, if there was no government, they would have still done that, and it would have been 1,000,000 times worse.
I don't think they would have done that
What
because there would have been no blanket.
So are you saying people won't take massive risks in order to try and make profit without the government? Because I think this is just a very clear example of what the free market looks like when it gets to run amok. And I'm not sure how you still manage to find a way to blame it on the government.
I think it's because they had that backing. They knew that the government had the ability to bail them out, and they knew the government would bail them out. If not, they would leave millions homeless. So it's like, why did they have that confidence to give out those mortgages like it's popcorn?
Well, because rich people control capital and they'll be fine. That's what I'm saying. The people you defend are people who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. That's the thing. They're not going homeless because of the shit that they cause. I'm very sorry for screaming.
See, I think that's the same when it comes to socialism. There is a ruling class. There is a class that decides where the wealth goes and who does what. What happens then is, and they don't care when 45 million people die in Mao's China.
But I think what you're also implying, though, is that these people, and what I'm saying is that the socialist state is made up of the workers. And so what I'm saying, you're trying to imply that, I don't know, Mao was just this comically evil person who wanted so many people to die.
No.
And he didn't.
No.
And it's the same with what happened during the Holodomor.
But it's what happens when you don't have incentive to produce as much in a capitalist society. When you have that incentive, that innovation, that incentive to innovate, people, yes, the rich get so much richer, but the poor benefit from that as well.
Have we seen that anywhere in SA?
I think that's beneficial. Have you driven past like RDP houses? Let's take 10 years ago when there were DSTV dishes on all of those RDP houses. That's the benefit of a capitalist society. Even those...
What, the RDP?
No, I'm talking about the luxury of DSTV 10 years ago, and how even in those impoverished
houses, settings,
Yeah, like
environments.
even in those impoverished groups, they still had the ability to watch DSTV and have flat screen TVs. You know, so
Okay.
if
But I mean, we're talking about a country here that has an expanded unemployment rate of about 46.5%. So I'm not sure how a small amount of people having DSTV.
no, I'm not saying that South Africa is a perfect nation by any means. I'm saying that in a capitalist society, the benefits for the low income brackets are better than it's sort of, if you look at the worst of Maoist China versus the worst of another capitalist state existing in that time as well. The capitalist state, because of the innovation and because of how it feeds down into the lower class, things becoming cheaper for them because the demand for the newest and best things are now higher priced, lowering the price of the innovation that came about 5 years ago at that state. The lower income brackets are then able to afford what the ruling class had a few years ago. So they just wait. It's just a matter of time before the newest and best thing filters down into the rest of the population.
But then why in so many capitalist states, especially the ones that are located in the periphery, so not the imperial core, why are there so many people that can't afford basic necessities like food? If the market works
South
in the way...
South Africa is not a
I'm not talking
proper-
about just South Africa. I'm talking about quite literally half the world.
Yeah, so half the world that was colonized, right?
Yes.
Right.
So what I'm saying is they're the losers in the global system of capitalism.
Yeah.
So why, even though they have capitalist forms of economy, why has it not worked in the way you're saying it's
Because
worked?
they've still taken the responsibility of, look at the Constitution of South Africa. Everybody has the right to education. Everybody has the right to shelter. But they can't do that.
But why? We just discussed it. Why can't they do that? And there's a reason for it.
Because they don't have the means.
And why don't they have the means? We're getting to it, and I discussed it on the group. It was regarding the IMF and the perpetual debt crisis that we've been forced into. And I'll expand more on that.
I think having a certain amount of debt in a country is good, but,
So,
they go a bit crazy.
okay, let me just discuss this. So, why our constitution promises us things that we can't have. And the reason we can't have them is this global system of capitalism. So, this is from a dossier researched and written under the leadership of Professor Grieve Chelwa of the Africa Institute, Global Studies University through Tricontinental Pan-Africa. So, the neocolonial system structured the world economy in such a way that African countries have been compelled to sell their raw materials for low prices, earn minimal royalties from Western multinational corporations, pay high prices for imported finished products, borrow money through the International Monetary Fund and Western commercial creditors to cover their budgetary shortfall, pay high debt service fees, implement austerity programs at the behest of the IMF that cuts fundamental social services, and then enter into a debt spiral seemingly for eternity.
Right, but it's not a spiral for eternity, because what's happening now is it's becoming that because the government has the responsibility of all these things. They have the responsibility to educate the population, to feed the population, to house the population. That's why they're incurring so much debt. If they didn't have that, the debt would be okay.
But I just fail to understand your logic, because look at America, for example. There the free market reigns, right? And why is it that they have...
No. I mean,
America doesn't have a free market.
it has a free market, but I mean, the government has so much regulations on in America now. It's not really. It's more in America now. It exists as this shell of its former self. They have now the people with the money lobby for laws that keep the money in their pockets, and that's not a true free market.
But yes, that's, oh my God, it's like you're always saying the thing I'm thinking, but like you come at it at the complete opposite way. So that is exactly what I'm arguing for, is that the free market is a lie and a contradiction in and of itself, because the fundamental rule of capitalism is that capital must get bigger, it must expand, it must accumulate, it must become bigger and bigger and bigger, or it dies. And so naturally it creates monopolies that enrich themselves. It's how capital works.
Okay, I understand what you're saying about capitalism and the criticisms of it, and that's very interesting. That's something I need to go think about, and that's something new to me. And I haven't thought about it like that. That can't exist on its own without that feedback loop. Can you accept that in a socialist state, when you have workers that who don't own their own means of production, they don't have incentives to produce as vehemently as a free market, because you don't get to keep what you produce. It gets decided how it's distributed elsewhere, right?
Okay.
That you don't, at the end of the day, it has an expiry date. Like there's lots of production, and as incentive goes down to produce, because you don't feel the need to keep. There's no incentive to grow, right? There's just an incentive to maintain what you have. And if you aren't feeling that direct feedback every month of, okay, here's my money, I get to go and keep it and spend it how I like.
But that is how it worked. For example, in the Soviet Union, the main difference was that factories were based on a quota system, right? Because if you produce anything above a quota system, you're creating wastage. You're producing more than what you need, right? So you have your quota system, you fill the quota, you get paid your salary for the month, and it's your money. Go spend it on whatever you want to spend it on. That's how it worked. So I do think you're slightly misinformed about how socialist states have worked in some regard.
Well, that's because it's at the end of the day, people haven't been able to maintain as much production of what they've needed. You know, it goes down. Like, people stop producing as much as what everybody needs. Needs aren't met, because that's how you end up with 45 million people dead and hungry.
Well, no, I don't. Do you even know how Mao's famine was caused?
That's my perception.
But do you know what exactly caused it?
What do you? How do you think it was?
So Mao's famine happened during what he called the Great Leap Forward, which was a period of rapid industrialization in China. And Mao had a very uninformed perspective on biology, I would say. And so what he believed that was, in order to advance Chinese agriculture, 4 pests needed to be eradicated, one of which was sparrows. And so what happened was he instructed all of the peasants to purge essentially the population of sparrows. But what happened was that sparrows were the natural predators of locusts. And so what happened was, because they no longer had their natural predator, the locusts began to rapidly multiply and eat all the grain, which is what caused the famine. Now, my point is that Mao didn't do that because he's some comically evil dude who just wanted everyone to starve. And I think the cult of personality that grew around Mao also arose from material conditions, because China, being an extremely backwards and poor agrarian society, didn't really have an abundance of biologists, or agricultural experts to advise in these things. And so that's why
because there was no innovation. There was no incentive.
Because it was such a damn poor country, and this is like in the 60s. Biology wasn't even that developed at the time. So I don't think you can just say, oh, it's innovation, because this is a country, and just to give you some context, for example, the Kuomintang regime, which was in power at the time when the revolution was taking place, when the communists liberated Shanghai from the KMT during the revolution, more than 20% of the residents of Shanghai were all drug addicts. So what I'm trying to say is this is the kind of country that the Maoist government inherited. This is what they were working with. So I don't think you can just say innovation, because the world,
No, I just think that
60 years ago was very different.
if Maoist China was a capitalist state and you had like 5 different companies controlling the means of production, and then one of the companies decided, let's kill all the sparrows on our land, and they were wiped out, you would still have 4 companies that decided to do other forms of innovation, because that's a form of innovation. Let's kill the sparrows and let's see what happens on our land when we try to do this great leap forward and produce more grain. So when they try to do that, it doesn't affect now everybody, it just affects that one company, and then that company falls
for
apart.
400 years prior, China was a capitalist society. And they were still ravaged by famine. So I don't really see how capitalism would have solved that problem. But like I said before, I think a very important consideration is that what happened post-Mao, and I'm not by any means defending Mao, I'm very critical of him in many regards, but what I'm saying is we need to look at these people with nuance. And an undeniable fact is that China was a land ravaged by famine, and after the revolution, they were able to achieve food security. That is what happened.
Bread lines.
Bread line sounds a hell of a lot better than not having anything to eat. I can tell you that much. Because I know the bread lines thing, I've heard it a million times in the Soviet Union. They're like, oh my God, look at these people, they're in bread lines. And what was happening to people before the revolution? They didn't have anything.
Right, but what I'm saying is that it's a large portion of the population that have bread lines, whereas a small population of that have nothing to eat.
Are you talking about Russia? Pre-revolutionary Russia?
That's where the bread line sort of incentive comes from.
Because Russia was also an extremely, extremely poverty-stricken country. There were people dying of starvation all the time. So I think you must realize that when you look at these countries, you have to look at them at the stage of development that they were at the time of the revolution. Because if you look at it from that lens,
right, so
you'll see that, socialism genuinely brought a drastic increase in the quality of life for the citizens in Russia at that time.
My thing is it has an expiry date. My thing is with socialism is that because you don't have incentive to innovate, incentive to create more, your only incentive is to maintain. Because of entropy, you end up collapsing. You end up having that famine. You end up having, bread lines. You end up having, because people, what's that quote for communism or socialism where it's like, to each their need and from each?
From each according to their ability, to each according to their need.
Yeah, and what if I decide my ability, I don't want to produce this thing anymore. I want to go and paint.
Mm.
And then a large, what's the incentive for me to take on a harder job if I'm still getting the same as the person next to me?
Oh my goodness, this is actually one of the most stark misconceptions that people have about socialism, because by absolutely no means are people getting paid the same under a socialist society. This was never, ever the case, and I'm actually not sure how this lie has infested the minds of so many people. Because even in the Soviet Union, in any socialist state, doctors were not getting paid the same as factory workers. That was never, ever the case. So I'd just like to correct you on that, but that was not at all how it happened. So there was very much an incentive to go and you can study and you can become a doctor. I mean, if you look at Cuba has, I think, the highest literacy rate in the world. They have a higher literacy rate than the United States. Cuba's sitting at 99.7%, and I think the US is at about 65 to 70%. And Cuba as well has the highest doctor-to-patient ratio in the world. And I know we on the last pod, we were talking something about doctors, and there's no incentive to become a doctor. But then you have a socialist state that has the highest ratio between patients and doctors in the world, to the point that Cuba actually sent several medical brigades to other countries, especially in Africa, to assist them in their revolutionary movements against the colonial power. You know, so
Was it because they're getting paid more? That's why you have more medical practitioners of that
I think
kind.
not just that though, but I think one of the biggest things that Castro's regime did, and of course, just to clarify, I am critical of Castro in many ways and the Cuban regime in many ways, but one of the biggest things about Cuba was their emphasis on education and making education, even tertiary education, more accessible to a lot more people, which is why they've had so many doctors, to the point that they could even afford, as a relatively poor country at the time, to send doctors to other countries to help people. So I don't necessarily think that profit is the driving motive of every human being. And I know both of you have kind of argued on the previous pod about things like greed and wanting more are intrinsic to human nature. Would I be correct about that?
No, I wouldn't say greed.
What would you say? Just wanting more in general?
Wanting better.
Wanting better?
For yourself, yeah, and for the people around you.
Well, my argument has always been that capitalism is a system that fosters selfishness and greed.
That's a bit of a blanket. Expand?
Well, because I would say the fundamental rule of capitalism is profit. It's not social good. And yes, sometimes those two things can align, but a lot of the time they don't. And so, I mean, if you look at even the rise of financial capital, for example, something quite interesting I'd like to discuss, and it's called the rapid rise of financialization. So this comes from Peter Grattan, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Memorial University of Newfoundland, Canada. And so he defines financialization as the growing dominance of financial markets, institutions, and transactions in a country's economy. Now, financialization concerns the increase in size and importance of a country's financial sector relative to its overall economy and represents a shift away from industrial capitalism. So rather than focusing on making products or developing new services, many businesses now generate significant profits through financial activities like stock buybacks, complex derivatives, and other monetary instruments. So what this has shown, it's a shift in focus from long-term growth through production, through creating things of value, to short-term profits through financial engineering, leading to massive growth in number and variety of financial instruments. So instead of reinvesting profits into new plants or research and development, they might use profits to buy back their stock, to boost share prices, leverage debt to acquire competitors, or spin off profitable divisions into separate financial entities to maximize shareholder value. I'm sorry, I know this is a lot. This represents a very concerning shift in where profits derive. This refers to firms generating a larger share of their profits from financial activities, such as trading, lending, and investing, rather than their core non-financial businesses. So what I'm again saying is, financialization or finance capital has become more profitable, and so it's what the market is going to, even to the detriment of ordinary people like you and me. Because capitalists have now developed or have now discovered that they can make money from money itself. There doesn't even need to be any actual industrial base behind it. They don't need to produce things that work anymore.
That's how the 2008 financial collapse happened.
Yes, securitization. So my argument has consistently been this is what the free market does. It's filled with contradictions that cause it to implode. And then we need to pay for it every single time.
Joel, what would you say to that statement about greed? That it eventually leads down this path, literally making money for the sake of making money. And, you know, like in the beginning...
Money is only as good as what it can buy. You know, people like to say Elon Musk has, you know, all this money, but the money isn't sitting in his bank. It's sitting in, it's the worth, it's the total worth of what his companies, and his companies, you know, they employ people. They have goods that they produce. If Elon Musk decided to abolish all of that and sell it for money so that it could sit in his bank, and then he decided, I'm going to give everybody in the world a million rand because he can afford it now, because that money was sitting in his bank, and now everybody's got $1 million rand in their bank. Now they can feed themselves. But all that's going to happen is that bread is now, instead of going to cost 20 Rand, it's going to cost 200 Rand. And you're going to buy the same loaf with the same amount of value that's sitting in your bank account. So I don't think it incentivizes greed. I think it incentivizes it incentivizes production. It incentivizes growth. You know, it's like that the pie must get bigger. It's not...
If it doesn't incentivize greed, right? Let's say we remove the potential pay from becoming a doctor in a capitalist society, right? Because that's one of the biggest drivers of people going that direction, right? What incentive, because we were asking Zishaan about incentive for going into certain industries in that kind of society. What's the incentive if we remove, that money drive in a capitalist society? If it's not greed.
Well, if you're not going to get paid in money, then
What's the point?
What's the
Is
point?
there something else?
If the money buys your ability to take care of your family and have a good life for the people around you. I suppose that's what most people spend their money on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could have that.
But the system is proposing does that. And it removes the middleman of you having to do the hard thinking about how you're going to provide.
Yes, it does that, but as I was saying, it has an expiry date. So it does that for a few people. And then the people that are left without it now have to find other means of production. And that's how you end up with the government killing, Soviet Russia silencing people that went against their thought. And Mao killing people that went against... there were probably people that said, hey, Mao, it's not a good idea to kill all these sparrows. What happened to them? You don't hear from them.
My thing is, right, you want to take the root of that nonsense number about Stalin, that, oh my God, Stalin killed 60 million people, or there were 60 million people in the internment camps. But my question to you is, post-1991, where were these millions of people pouring back into society? Why was there no unearthing of mass graves? Why weren't there millions of people walking out of those prisons?
Okay.
Where were they?
Now we're going into conspiratory land, which is like the people who say, where are all the 6 million Jews? Where are all the bodies? Where are the numbers? There was only, what's that number they use? It's the 270,000. That I don't know if you've heard of this. There's like a certain portion of the population that don't think 6 million Jews were killed during the Nazi camps.
That's a wild one.
Yeah, so it's like we weren't there, so we can go around in circles,
But what's the is this the way that the stats were collected, or the numbers that is speaking
that
about?
number specifically, the 60 million number, comes from something called the Black Book of Communism, which very funnily was a publication that the authors, or some of the authors, deliberately distanced themselves from a few years after it was published, because they admitted that a lot of the figures were inflated for propaganda,
in order to
purposes.
prop themselves up.
No, in order to tarnish socialism. They were inflated for a specific purpose and they were not accurate. And if you look at the methodology that a lot of them used to arrive at those insane numbers, they did a lot of things. One of them was that even if you were a Soviet soldier and you died as a result of war or something, you were counted as someone that Stalin killed. Or if you died because of a workplace accident, you were someone that Stalin killed. They even went so far as to count something called non-births, which was essentially, they said, because ABC happened, X amount of babies were not born. And they counted that as deaths by Stalin.
So let's say I give you 30%. Let's say I give you 20 million. That's still left with 40 million people.
No, but I'm saying that there's absolutely no accurate methodology to come to any of those numbers. So I'm not saying that a lot of people didn't die. What I'm saying is, I don't think we should just espouse fictional numbers to try and prove a point. That's my thing. Because a lot of these numbers are coming from sources that themselves have admitted are not accurate.
My thing is, even if I don't mention numbers and I just say that there was a stage in which these societies collapsed. If you think about Mao, if you think about the Soviet Union, and how they reach their expiry date, and why they reach their expiry date is because there is no drive to keep these things going. There is just me, and I become just another number in a group, and I don't have, I can't have any. I don't see how you can incentivize growth within yourself if it just feeds into this big machine.
Okay, but look, you keep using this term expiry date, right? And if we look at the Soviet Union...
and when I say expiry date, I mean like that's when it needed to change its laws in order to maintain,
okay,
at least, yeah.
Good and well. But what I'm saying is you keep using this term expiry date. But if we look at the Soviet Union, for example, there was a referendum held in 1991 and one of the questions asked in that referendum was, would you like to preserve the Soviet Union as a group of socialist states, but give each republic a little bit more autonomy? And 70% of respondents voted yes. And the Soviet Union was still undemocratically dissolved. So I don't think these societies necessarily have an expiry date in the way that you say they do. And my second point would be that if you look at Russia, after they introduced the market reforms, things got significantly worse. Their GDP after 1991 tanked by 40%, and it only began to recover in 2007. So my thing is, you can criticize socialism as much as you want, but every single time market reforms have been brought back in, it's gotten worse for people. I mean, if you look at Russia today, it's actually, I would say, a lot worse off than it was in 1991.
Russia today is a lot worse than it was when?
In 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved.
By what measure?
I think the most stark being the GDP, the economic output totally tanked.
Interesting.
And now they have a lot more problems of unemployment as opposed to the Soviet Union that had full employment. There's a housing crisis now in Russia, which you consistently see across all capitalist states, even in the US. There's a housing crisis. And the reason for the housing crisis is the free market, because what happens in a free market? Capital centralizes, capital creates a monopoly. The monopoly has the most power in the market. They buy up most of the properties. And what happens? Rent shoots up, property prices shoot up. That's why almost nobody owns their own house anymore. They all need debt. That's why people can't afford to pay rent. It's because of the free market. So my overall argument is that whenever you take basic necessities and turn them into vehicles for profit, they get worse. And we've consistently seen this historically. Because, like I was saying, monopoly is a direct feature of a free market. They intrinsically develop and then dictate the free market.
I think that's better than having a state in which you're forced into a place because that's all that they can provide you with. Like,
so does a free market with a housing crisis sound better than everyone having a home to live in?
It's not when you say home, you're not giving everybody a 2-bedroom townhouse.
But that sounds, for a country like Russia, where there were tons of people out dying in the cold. To me, if I was a Russian peasant in 1917, that sounds a hell of a lot better than dying in a Russian winter outside cold on the streets.
Right, excluding the people in the internment camps.
What?
Excluding the people in the internment camps.
Again, like I was saying, I don't think we can counter-revolutionaries or Nazis at that time and be like, oh my God, look at these poor victims of communism. Because like I was saying, where were the millions pouring out of these camps when they were closed down? Where were they? Pouring back into society with tales of horror from the Gulag system. Where are they? That's the thing. So I'd be willing to accept that point from you if there was any substantial evidence behind it. I would accept it. But there simply isn't.
Sure. I mean, I don't know what to say to denying 60 million, you know.
My point is, where's the number coming from? I'm not saying 60 million people dying is okay. I'm not saying 4,000 people dying is okay.
Yeah.
I'm saying, where are the numbers coming from? And my point is that a lot of them have been inflated because the powers that be want you to think a certain way about a certain system.
It's interesting that you say that, though, because a while ago you showed that article about people that have died because of capitalism, and I asked, does that include socialist, societies? What does it include? And we didn't really, get to an answer. And it's like, but does that include? You're basically fighting the same numbers game here. Where do those numbers come from now?
Well, there are not really any socialist states left. I would say Cuba you could consider, DPRK you could consider, but China, Vietnam, Laos are very much free market economies now. I suppose the Communist Party is still in power, but I don't consider them to be socialist states. So even if you, in that 20 million figure, if you want to include 3 countries that are socialist, sure, it's still a big damn number.
Right, so if we take Deuel's 60 million, offset it by
That's
what?
not my 60 million.
The 60 million number,
Yeah.
offset it by what percent? Pick a percent, 30, 50%, still a big number.
But what I'm saying is, I really don't think it was that big. I would say maybe a few 100,000 at most. And I'm not saying that's okay.
Yeah, but that's how.
But what I'm
that's
saying,
the same thing. I mean, that's the same conspiracy of the 6 million Jews. Where are these numbers coming from?
but
How
I
are
think
you
the
counting
Holocaust
them?
is extremely well documented, which is why I don't deny
Yeah,
that
but then
number.
look at the Black Book. That's the documentation they have of the 60
But
million.
I've told you literally that
it's
the
the same.
authors...
It's the exact same thing.
But I've told you that the authors of the Black Book have literally admitted to those numbers being falsified for propaganda purposes. You
Yeah.
can look this up now if you want to.
There's
That's
also
the difference.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen like the Nazi deniers and how they prop up the number. They squash it down from 6 million all the way to 270K. But it's the same way you're squashing down 60 million all the way to a couple of 100,000. It's the exact.
It's not the exact same because I'm telling you the book that number is coming from, the authors of
Yeah,
that
they
publication...
deny the well documented. The Nazis were extremely. These were Germans, right? They were
Okay.
extremely well. That's how they got to that 6 million in the first place. They recorded who they killed, how they killed them, where they killed them, what experimentations they were done on them.
And no such documentation exists from the Soviet Union at that time. So to come up and inflate these absolutely imaginary numbers and then try and pass them off as truth is extremely disingenuous, especially when the people who came up with those statistics have admitted that they were false. That's the key difference.
Did they actually admit that
They
said
did.
the
You can
book that
Google
we
it
wrote
right
was
now
false?
if you want to. And the other thing, though, that I'd like to address is I think it's constantly passed off as this thing of socialism just kills millions of people for no reason. But I think it very vehemently discards all of the violence that capitalist states have needed to enforce their will, not only on their own populations, but on others as well.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary. It's like
Okay, but it's how the world works. It's not necessary, we don't want it, but it's how the free market works. It's how
and
it's
that's
shown
what I'm saying
itself to
about
work.
like communist China. That's how it's worked. That's how we end up with 40 people. What was it? 45 million people dying in the Great Leap Forward. It's how that system ends up. That's the road to which it leads.
But what I'm saying is you, again, with that 45 million, you're completely ignoring the fact that China's been ravaged by famine during 400 years of capitalism.
But at the end of the day, when they took apart this new system that was going to feed everybody and, provide all this nice, good and well things for everybody, it ended up with 45 million people dead at the end of the day. Because one person decided we're going to do this. And the people who disagree with me, they can go sit in prison because it's not what this upper class decides needs to take place.
Look,
and
and
then
I don't agree with that, right? But I think it's also
Isn't-
necessary to acknowledge, and you may disagree, that that's not an intrinsic feature of socialism, because the cult of personality that was cultivated around Mao was very much a consequence of the kind of society that China was. There were not exactly a large number of educated people jumping to be the leader. And not all forms of socialism have looked like Maoist China. If you look at Yugoslavia, it was completely different. You know, if you look at Nicaragua, their form of government was completely different.
yeah, I'm
so
not
it doesn't
familiar with
mean-
these, so I can't.
Sorry?
I'm not familiar with these economies, so I can't
Okay,
comment on
okay.
it.
But I think, sorry, did you want to say
No, it's
something?
okay. I'll finish your thoughts here.
So just something very interesting that I'd like to point out is I don't think it's fair to critique the violence that has taken place in socialist countries as an intrinsic feature of socialism.
And I don't think it's fair to critique the violence caused by Americans in the Middle East as a feature of capitalism.
But I've explained to you now how those interventions are what's allowed them to dominate as a market power. Because without them, without that intervention, it doesn't work. And like I've
How do
explained,
you know it doesn't work?
Well, just bear with me here, because I've explained
You know?
consistently, right, that
We don't
capitalism-
live in a world in where they didn't do that, so we don't know that it doesn't work.
Well, look at Africa. We don't have a smaller fish to exploit. Look at where we are
Yeah,
as a
but that,
continent.
you know, it's like I've explained with Africa. We have all this debt, but it's because we have all this responsibility that we cannot fulfill. So we take
But
on
why
more debt.
can't we fulfill that responsibility? And I've talked about unequal exchange on here already. There's a reason we can't fulfill that responsibility. And it's not because we don't have the means to. It's because we're overexploited. It's because there's massive drain going out of our economies every single year. And there's more that I'd really like to say about that just to get through to you. And another thing that I'd like to address, other than unequal exchange, which I do have one more stat. So this is from the same Jason Hickel that I mentioned earlier, which is that drain from the global south is worth over $10 trillion per year in northern prices. So that's just one part of the amount of money that is going out of our economies every single year. But the second part of that is illicit financial flows. And I think it's a very common, both neoliberal and libertarian perspective to point fingers at the government, especially in SA, and just be like, the government's incompetent and they can't do anything and the ANC is corrupt and this is why we have all these problems.
Because they can't
But-
and they are corrupt.
Sorry?
Because they can't and they are corrupt.
Yes, but that's not what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is there's corruption in the private sector as well, and there's corruption that is causing us to lose money. And it's unfortunately just how it's been working. So this is from an
They
article.
only tax so much because they need to feed that responsibility of the Constitution.
Well, because
If they didn't have that money to be corrupt in the first place, then they wouldn't. If they weren't taking all this money, then they wouldn't be the ability to be that as corrupt as what they are.
But what I'm saying is, so when you give all this responsibility to the free market, what happens? You get people starving, you get a homelessness crisis, you get unemployment.
And we don't have unemployment and a homelessness crisis, and
But that's because we live
People
under
starving now.
capitalism. We don't have
I don't-
democratic working class participation in our economy.
we don't live under a proper free market. If you look at our constitution, our constitution says that's not a. Our constitution is so far apart from America's that distinction is insane. I mean, America doesn't have anything resembling the constitution of South Africa
In what
when
way?
it comes
in
to
terms of regulation.
when it comes to our rights, the Bill of Rights, compared to the Bill of Independence, right? Free speech, the right to bear arms, compared to you have the right to shelter, you have the right to education, right? The United States government doesn't take that responsibility upon themselves, but the South African government does.
Well, I do agree with you in that sense that I feel for a capitalist government in a country like SA to take on those responsibilities is silly. And I think
Yeah.
that's why so many of the youth, feel left behind by the system. But there is a problem that I have because I see this a lot, and people like to say that, or especially to young people, that poverty is kind of your fault. And it's because you're not working hard enough and there's money to make, if you're willing to go get it. And so I'd like to just read you a short extract from an article written by Zaki Mamdu, who's part of the executive committee of the Workers' and Socialist Party in South Africa. And he says, I recently sat on a panel in the Soweto community of Snake Park for a youth dialogue. There, some so-called entrepreneurs insisted that young people just need to think creatively, save their pennies and hustle harder, assuring them that the money is out there for the taking so long as you are bold enough to get yours. But these are not solutions. If anything, they are insults. These self-styled motivational speakers are saying that poverty is your fault. The problem is not the system, but you. That if you can't beat unemployment, it's because you are lazy or you lack imagination. They completely fail to account for the reality in which you can sell quotas, cut hair, clean sneakers, build a side hustle, run a spaza, learn forex or push bolt, and still go to sleep hungry. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because the system is designed that way. Because capitalism survives by making sure that people hustle to stay poor. So I'd really love to know what your thoughts are on that.
In what world is a Bolt driver or a spaza shop owner or the people that put up tents and do other people's hair not being able to feed themselves?
Well, why do you think we have so much poverty in this country? A lot of these people
poverty
are
are not
working.
those people that are working.
What do you mean? So are you saying everyone that has a job is not poor? Because that is absolutely not the case. Just because you have a job. I mean, if you look at what our minimum wage is, I believe it's something close to 4,500 Rand. That's absolutely nothing. That's a poverty wage. You're going to live a crappy life, an undignified existence. So, and you can very much earn that by doing the most basic of jobs. So I do think what we have is an economic system where you can work really, really hard. You can provide something very useful.
I think the problem is skill.
And you still live in poverty.
I think the problem is skill. Those people, they're living okay. Like, they're not living in straight poverty. You're talking about minimum wage where it should be given to students who don't have any skill yet, but this is now given to people who are fully grown adults. They're earning minimum wage because they don't have a skill that they can make money off of. So I think the problem is not giving free education in terms of universities, but giving skills, like allowing people to sort of technicons, but I think technicons is more.
But the thing is, right,
I'm talking about welding, and I'm talking about electricians, and I'm talking about plumbing, those kinds of skills in which you can then make more than just minimum wage.
That's fine, right? But a lot of the people that live in poverty and are not leading good quality lives and are not leading a dignified existence, a lot of those people, and I dare say the majority, are people who work extremely necessary jobs. So for you to kind of say that this is not skill, I feel is a bit insulting to these people.
It doesn't take skill to be McDonald's.
It doesn't take skill to work in a factory. I mean, can you produce anything in a steelworks factory? Is that not a skill?
No, that is skill. But they're not earning minimum wage. I'm
but
talking
they
about
still
minimum
live in
wage
poverty,
in terms of
dude.
what factory worker.
Why do you think
Which we gotta specify, like when I say minimum wage and when I'm talking about skill depletion or people not having skills and therefore earning minimum wage, I'm thinking about people who work at KFC or McDonald's or that doesn't take a lot of skill.
But don't you think that if there's a job, right, and a job requires someone to work, right? So if we want to eat KFC, there needs to be someone working at KFC to produce it. So my argument is that, well, why can't that worker at KFC lead a happy and dignified life? Why do they need to earn so little? Like, I don't get that. Just because you're saying they don't have a skill.
Because it doesn't take a lot of skill to do that job in the first place. That person. Our problem at the moment is that those jobs should be relegated to students who are learning a skill in order to move away from that job and earn something that can give them a dignified life.
But the thing is, are you proposing that they always even though these are necessary jobs, these people always need to have undignified lives, even though those jobs need doing. And there must always just be a group of people.
No, if you think about like Australia, when you go to order McDonald's in Australia, it's students that are behind the counter who do that job, but they have education or a skill that they're acquiring in the background to then move away from that job later and do whatever, earn money with the skill that they're now going to
But what I'm saying
learn.
is
and
that
then a new set of students come in and take those jobs that pay minimum wage.
But
Our
what
problem at the moment in South Africa is that we don't have a big enough economy. Everybody's running towards Gauteng and they're running towards Cape Town, and there isn't enough. There really just isn't enough jobs.
But
So-
do you not think that perhaps the problem that we also don't have enough skills development in SA is because people don't have access to education, to tertiary education, and, where they can actually learn a skill?
I don't think you need tertiary education. Like, you don't need to go to university in order to become an electrician.
But you have to study something. You need to learn it from somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, but
so
it
anything
doesn't need
above
to
high
be-
school is tertiary. I don't just mean
Oh,
university.
okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do think that is a
Gentlemen?
problem.
We're going to have to start closing off now. So what I want to do is I'm going to hit a restart on the cameras and we're just going to do closing. So what I'd really like you guys to do now, just because we did this in the beginning, is to try and steelman your side, just to see if the understanding of each other's side changed, because it was so interesting, and I'm going to see it again when we watch this recording, but there's so many parallels, man, to what you guys are saying. It's just from a different side. Like you said, dude, you were saying you were hearing your voice in your head, and Deuel was saying the same thing, but then last minute he takes a left or a right, and So, all right, so let's do that. We'll be right back. All right, gents, let's do that. So maybe Zishaan, you take it from your side first.
Oh, so what exactly am I?
So what you're doing now is you're going to try and steelman Deuel's side, his argument for.
What does steelmanning mean?
So steelmanning, that's very interesting.
Is
that you
make
don't
the
know what that-
argument for me.
Make the argument for him.
Okay.
Make the argument that libertarianism, as far as it is derived from capitalism, I'm trying to include both of what you guys said there, is actually a system worth working on and a system worth not maintaining but fighting for, as far as it has potential to satisfy the needs of the people, even though it has its downfalls.
Okay, so I'll start so I can see.
Let
in
me
the
start.
world.
Give Zishaan that. Give
Yeah.
Zishaan that
So-
shot first.
In terms of capitalism, I can say that even Marx himself did commend capitalism for how it developed the means of production during its epoch, right? And he also admitted that the bourgeois revolution that established capitalism as the world order was necessary to overthrow the feudal society that preceded it, right? The only part where I diverge from that is in the sense that it isn't the natural law of society and it isn't the way forward for humanity. That's what I believe. But I very much do acknowledge that, yes, capitalism has had some gains over, the past 400 years, but there are some very, very serious deficiencies in it that are only going to get worse as its contradictions intensify. That would be my contribution.
All right. Deuel?
Yeah, so I could see a world in where you have your ability and you give that to society, and then because your contribution is more than the person sitting next to you, as an example, you then get given more than the person sitting next to you. I just don't see how the people who decide who gets what are going to be fair in that instance. And that's why I push for the free market, because I feel like it's more fair as to you getting your worth,
But steelman him a little bit more. Why do you think his system, his proposed system, is worth considering?
I think it's worth considering. Why do I think it's worth considering? Why do you think it's worth considering?
See, now this is why steelman is so interesting, because now you have to think and you have to believe your words.
What's happening next door?
Sports.
Oh. Yeah, I think it's worth considering if it allows for more people to be fed, more people to not worry about the basic needs of survival. How does it end up there? I at the moment don't see it, but it's worth considering if there's a chance that that is the result.
I think that's valid.
Happiness. I didn't even need to use a safe word. It was getting rough, like 2 points. Okay, but now what I will say is, from my
maybe you felt like it, but it didn't feel like it to me.
no, there were a couple points. What do you mean? Like,
Well, what are you talking about?
Like I never felt hostility.
no, it wasn't hostility. It was when we stopped debating the idea and started debating each other. That was the problem.
When did we do
In what
that?
sense?
So, when it was, we were saying, what's the word? I forgot the word, but it was an easier way to explain it is, you are not seeing it this way. Your view is the problem, and the idea is more like I like discussion more than debates. Let me put it that way, because we can feel free to experiment, to give each other points here and there.
I think the thing though with political debates, right, is your political views are very much a reflection of how you see life, how you see individuals, how you see society, and your morals. So I think in that sense, it always does become
Gets a bit heated,
slightly
yeah.
personal. But I mean, I didn't sense any hostility. I think we just have
Yeah,
very different
I don't sense
ideas. And I think the other thing is, we're not debating neoliberalism versus libertarianism. We're debating socialism versus libertarianism. Though for me, it's just capitalism with extra steps.
Yeah. Brackets leads to capitalism eventually.
It's capitalism without warmongering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and you're arguing that my libertarianism requires warmongering in order to exist.
And one other thing I noticed, which was something I wanted to say, is that the world is so complex that when we say X leads to Y, I always had this face that I had, because I know, like, we're people and there's so many different factors that lead to something,
Yeah.
and so it's difficult to extrapolate X from Y. But you guys are both saying that the system I want has not been shown yet, and I'm advocating for it, that it is possible.
I don't believe that, but
No, okay, so when we spoke, you mentioned that there are different external factors that contribute to why it's difficult to produce
yes,
society, right?
So what I do believe about what we've seen of socialism in the past is that in terms of its goal to deliver fundamental public services and make them accessible for whole populations, I do believe we've seen several successes in that regard. What I do admit, though, is that these countries did have internal deficiencies of their own that were a part in their downfall. But what I also choose to acknowledge is the role that capitalist intervention and encirclement played in them. But I do believe we've seen several excellent instances of socialism in the world.
Okay.
So that is
But they're
my
not
closing.
in existence now?
No.
Okay.
I would say that after the Cold
Right.
War, most of them did break down.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And it just makes me think, we'll never see perfect factors in the world. The world would never be in a perfect state for us to see perfect versions of our societies. But maybe that's what defines a working system, the fact that it can operate despite whatever instability a society may have or a time may have.
Its ability to adapt.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe that's a point of it. But nevertheless, thanks for making the time, gents. I think this was an interesting one. It's a bit of a shock compared to my other episodes. I think people watching like, man, is this the same? We're trying shit, and I think it was fun nonetheless.
Yeah, it was very
I
interesting.
don't think your viewers would have ever expected to have a communist on your podcast.
Okay, so it's safe to call you that then. Yeah, we've got a commie on the podcast.
Commie, I'm a dirty commie.
A dirty commie.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
So I'm gonna have to give them like a little
I
prologue.
eat
prelude.
everyone's grain with a comically large
It's
spoon,
my
and I
spoon,
steal
yes.
candy from babies because
Comrade.
I hate humanity.
Yeah.
Yes, comrades. So,